Committee meets today to receive testimony from Deputy Secretary of Defense Robert Work, Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, and Admiral Mike Rogers, the Commander of U.S. Cyber Command, Director of the National Security Agency, and Chief of the Central Security Service. We thank each of the witnesses for their service and for appearing before the committee. We meet at a critical time for the defense of our nation from cyber attacks. In just the past year, we all know the United States has been attacked by cyberspace by Iran, North Korea, China, and Russia. Indeed, since our last cyber hearing in March, the attacks have only increased, crippling or severely disrupting networks across the government and private sector and compromising sensitive national security information. Recent attacks against the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Pentagon, and the Office of Personnel Management are just the latest examples of the growing boldness of our adversaries and their desire to push the limits of acceptable behavior in cyberspace. New intrusions, breaches, and hacks are occurring daily. The trends are getting worse, but it seems the administration is still not mounted an adequate response. They say they will, quote, respond at the time and manner of our choosing, unquote, but then either take no action or pursue largely symbolic responses that have zero impact on our adversaries' behavior. Not surprisingly, the attacks continue. Our adversaries steal, delete, and manipulate our data at will, gaining a competitive economic edge and improving their military capability. They demonstrate their own means to attack our critical infrastructure. And they do all of this at a time and manner of their choosing. More and more, they are even leaving behind what Admiral Rogers recently referred to as, quote, cyber fingerprints, showing that they feel confident that they can attack us with impunity and without significant consequences. Just consider the recent case with China. After much hand-wringing, it appears the President will not impose sanctions in response to China's efforts to steal intellectual property, pillage the designs of our critical weapon systems, and wage economic espionage against U.S. companies. Instead, last week's state visit for the President of China simply amounted to more vague commitments not to conduct or knowingly support cyber-enabled theft of intellectual property. What's worse, the White House has chosen to reward China with diplomatic discussions about establishing norms of behavior that are favorable to both China and Russia. Any internationally agreed upon rules of the road in cyberspace must explicitly recognize the right of self-defense, as contained in Article 51 of the UN Charter, along with meaningful human rights and intellectual property rights protections. The administration should not concede this point to autocratic regimes that seek to distort core principles of the international order to our detriment. Make no mistake, we are not winning the fight in cyberspace. Our adversaries view our response to malicious cyber activity as timid and ineffectual. Put simply, the problem is a lack of deterrence. As Admiral Rogers has previously testified, the administration has not demonstrated to our adversaries that the consequences of continued cyber attacks against us outweigh the benefit. Until this happens, the attacks will continue and our national security interests will suffer. Establishing cyber deterrence requires a strategy to defend, deter, and aggressively respond to the challenges to our national security in cyberspace. That is exactly what the Congress required in the fiscal year 2014 National Defense Authorization Act. That strategy is now over a year late and counting. And while the Department of Defense's 2015 cyber strategy is a big improvement over previous such efforts, it still does not integrate the ends, ways, and means to deter attacks in cyberspace. Establishing a cyber deterrence also requires robust capabilities, both offensive and defensive, that can pose a credible threat to our adversaries, a goal on which the Congress, and specifically this committee, remains actively engaged. The good news here is that significant progress has been made over the past few years in developing our cyber force. That force will include a mix of professionals trained to defend the nation against cyber attacks, to support the geographic combatant commands in meeting their objectives, and to defend DoD networks. This is good, but the vast majority of our DoD resources have gone toward shoring up our cyber defenses. Far more needs to be done to develop the necessary capabilities to deter attacks, fight, and win in cyberspace. Policy indecision should not become an impediment to capability development. We do not develop weapons because we want to use them. We develop them so as we do not have to. And yet in the cyber domain, as Admiral Rogers testified in March, quote, "We're at a tipping point." He said, quote, "We've got to broaden our capabilities to provide policymakers and operational commanders with a broader range of options. We must invest more in the offensive capabilities that our cyber mission teams need to win on the cyber battlefield. The fiscal year 2016 NDAA seeks to address this challenge in a number of ways, including a pilot program to provide the commander of Cyber Command with limited rapid acquisition authorities. Finally, we know the Defense Department is in the process of assessing whether the existing combatant command structure adequately addresses the mission of cyber warfare and whether to elevate Cyber Command to a unified command. There are worthwhile arguments on both sides of this debate. I look forward to hearing Admiral Rogers' views on this question and his assessment of how an elevation of Cyber Command might enhance our overall cyber defense posture. I also look forward to hearing from our witnesses what, if any, progress has been made on addressing disagreements within the interagency on the delegation and exercise of authority to use cyber capabilities. I thank the witnesses again for appearing before the committee. I look forward to their testimony. Senator Reid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me commend you for scheduling this very important hearing. It's an appropriate time to discuss a number of important cyber issues with our witnesses, especially in light of the cyber agreements announced last Friday between President Obama and the President of China. I want to thank Director Clapper, Deputy Secretary of Work, and Cyber Commander Admiral Rogers for their testimony today and for their service to the nation. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. Let me start with a series of cyber agreements with China. The apparent commitment by China to cease stealing U.S. intellectual property for their economic gain is notable, and I expect we will have a robust discussion about China's compliance and our course of action if it does not. China's leaders must be aware that its reputation and standing in the eyes of the American people will continue to decline if this piracy does not stop, which ultimately will have a tremendously negative impact on our relations with China. I would also emphasize the potential importance of China embracing a set of international norms in cyberspace developed by the United Nations, which includes a commitment to refrain from attacks on other nations' critical infrastructure. Next, I would highlight that we are facing the recurring issue of whether or when to elevate Cyber Command from a sub-unified command to a full unified command, and whether to sustain the current dual-hat arrangement under which the commander of Cyber Command also serves as the director of NSA. I understand that the Department may be nearing a recommendation to the President that the next unified command plan elevates Cyber Command to a unified command. The committee in the past has questioned whether Cyber Command is mature enough to warrant elevation to a unified command, and whether the dual-hat arrangement should continue when a decision is made to elevate the command. Put simply, if Cyber Command is so reliant on NSA that common leadership is still necessary, is the command ready to stand on its own as a unified combatant command? This is an issue that Senator McCain has drawn attention to, and it's something that I think is very critical going forward for this committee. Directly related to that question of the maturity of Cyber Command is the status of the military cyber mission units that the Department only began fielding over the last 2 years. Commendably, the Department is meeting its schedule for standing up these units with trained personnel, but by its own admission, the equipment, tools, and capabilities of these forces remain limited. Indeed, the committee's proposed FY16 National Defense Authorization Act includes a mandate that the Secretary of Defense designate executive agents from among the services to build a so-called unified platform, persistent training environment, and command and control systems that are necessary for these forces to operate effectively. It will take a number of years to build these capabilities. We are behind in developing these military capabilities for our cyber forces because the Defense Department was persuaded that the systems and capabilities that NSA already has would be adequate and appropriate for use by Cyber Command. This is an important example of an assumed critical dependency on NSA and an assumed commonality between intelligence operations and military operations in cyberspace that in some cases has turned out to be inaccurate. For a number of years, this committee has been urging the executive branch to work diligently to identify all practical methods to deter malicious actions in cyberspace, and to articulate a strategy for implementing them. Some believe that retaliation in kind in cyberspace is a necessary and effective component of such a strategy. I look forward to hearing the views of our witnesses on this matter. As my colleagues and our witnesses are well aware, the Senate went into recess for the August break, having reached an agreement for bringing the Cyber Information Sharing Bill to the floor for debate. I know the Chairman is in full agreement on the need to debate, amend, and pass that legislation this year in the interest of national security, and so am I. We must also recognize the Defense Department and intelligence community are not operating alone to protect America's cyber infrastructure. Most notably rely on the Department of Homeland Security for protection of America's critical infrastructure. The use of overseas contingency operations funding to avoid the Budget Control Act caps in defense does nothing to help the DHS or other non-defense partners avoid the effects of sequestration. This is yet another argument for why we need a comprehensive solution to the problem of sequestration. Finally, I think it is important that we hear from our witnesses on the subject of encryption. Post-Snowden, U.S. technology companies, fearful of losing business at home and abroad, are encrypting communications and offering encryption services for which even the companies themselves have no technical capability to unlock. FBI Director Comey has given multiple speeches warning the law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies that they will be going dark with serious consequences for public safety and national security. These and other questions, gentlemen, are vitally important, and I look forward to your testimony.
I thank the witnesses. Director Clapper, I've tried to impress on members of this committee to show deference to old age, and so we'd like to begin with you.
Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, members of the committee, when I testified on the intelligence community's worldwide threat assessment at the end of February, cyber threats again led our annual threat report for the third year in a row. We're here today to respond to the several requests in your invitation letter, and I will focus on an overview of cyber threats briefly that face our nation and their attendant national security implications, and then Secretary Work, Admiral Rogers will follow as well. We will, as you understand, perhaps run into some classified aspects we won't be able to discuss as fully in this open televised hearing. I do want to take note of and thank the members of the committee who are engaged on this issue and have spoken to it publicly, as the two of you just have. So by way of overview, cyber threats to U.S. national and economic security are increasing in frequency, scale, sophistication, and severity of impact. Although we must be prepared for a large Armageddon-scaled strike that would debilitate the entire U.S. infrastructure, that is not, we believe, the most likely scenario. Our primary concern now is low to moderate level cyber attacks from a variety of sources, which will continue and probably expand. This imposes increasing costs to our business, to U.S. economic competitiveness, and to national security. Because of our heavy dependence on the Internet, nearly all information communication technologies and IT networks and systems will be perpetually at risk. These weaknesses provide an array of possibilities for nefarious activity by cyber threat actors, including remote hacking instructions, supply chain operations to insert compromised hardware or software, malicious actions by insiders, and simple human mistakes by system users. These cyber threats come from a range of actors, including nation-states, which fall into two broad categories. Those with highly sophisticated cyber programs, most notably Russia and China, are our peer competitors. And those with lesser technical capabilities but more nefarious intent, such as Iran and North Korea, who are also much more aggressive and unpredictable. Then there are non-nation-state entities, criminals motivated by profit, hackers, or extremists motivated by ideology. Profit-motivated cyber criminals rely on loosely networked online marketplaces, often referred to as the cyber underground or dark web, that provide a forum for the merchandising of illicit tools, services, and infrastructure, and stolen personal information and financial data. The most significant financial cyber criminal threats to U.S. entities and our international partners come from a relatively small subset of actors, facilitators, and criminal forums. And terrorist groups will continue to experiment with hacking, which could serve as the foundation for developing more advanced capabilities. Cyber espionage, criminal and terrorist entities all undermine data confidentiality. Denial of service operations and data deletion attacks undermine availability. And in the future, I believe we'll see more cyber operations that will change or manipulate electronic information to compromise its integrity. In other words, compromise its accuracy and reliability instead of deleting it or disrupting access to it. As illustrated so dramatically with the OPM breaches, counterintelligence risks are inherent when foreign intelligence agencies obtain access to an individual's identity information, of course, a problem that the Department of Defense has encountered. Foreign intelligence agencies or non-state entities could target the individual, family members, co-workers, and neighbors using a variety of physical and electronic methods for extortion or recruiting purposes. And speaking of the OPM breaches, let me say a couple words about attribution. It is not a simple process, involves at least 3 related but distinct determinations: the geographic point of origin, the identity of the actual perpetrator doing the keystrokes, and the responsibility for directing the act. In the case of OPM, we have differing degrees of confidence in our assessment of the actual responsibility for each of these 3 elements. Such malicious cyber activity will continue and probably accelerate until we establish and demonstrate the capability to deter malicious state-sponsored cyber activity. And establishing a credible deterrent depends on reaching agreement on norms of cyber behavior by the international community. So in summary, the cyber threats to U.S. national and economic security have become increasingly diverse, sophisticated, and harmful. There are a variety of federal entities that work this cyber problem, and DHS, FBI, NSA, and other law enforcement, intelligence, and sector-specific agencies like Treasury and Energy. And every day, each of these centers and entities get better at what they do individually. I believe now we've reached the point where we think it's time to knit together all the intelligence these separate activities need to defend our networks, because while these entities may be defending different networks, they are often defending against the same threats. So that's one reason the President directed me to form a small center to integrate cyber threat intelligence. And I strongly believe the time's come for the creation of such a center to parallel the centers that we operate for counterterrorism, counterproliferation, and counterintelligence and security. With that, let me turn to Deputy Secretary Work.
Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished members of the committee, thank you very much for inviting us here this morning to talk about the threats of cyber. This committee has led the way in discussing the threats and the response to these threats, and the department looks forward to working with the committee to get better in this regard. As D&I Clapper has said, cyber intrusions and attacks by both state and non-state actors have increased dramatically in recent years, and particularly troubling are the increased frequency and scale of state-sponsored cyber actors breaching U.S. government and business networks. These adversaries continually adapt and evolve in response to our cyber countermeasures, threatening our networks and systems of the Department of Defense, our nation's critical infrastructure, and U.S. companies and interests globally. The recent spate of cyber events, to include the intrusions into OPM, the attacks on Sony, and the joint staff networks by 3 separate state actors, is not just espionage of convenience, but a threat to our national security. As one of our responses to this growing threat, we released in 2015 the DoD Cyber Strategy, which will guide the development of our cyber forces and strengthen our cybersecurity and cyber deterrence posture. That is its aim. The department is pushing hard to achieve the department's 3 core missions as defined in the strategy. The first and absolutely most important mission is to defend DoD network systems and information. Secretary Carter has made this the #1 priority in the department, and we are really getting after it now. Second, to defend the nation against cyber events of significant consequence. And third, to provide cyber support to operational and contingency plans. And in this regard, the U.S. Cyber Command may be directed to conduct cyber operations in coordination with other government agencies as appropriate to deter or defeat strategic threats in other domains. Now, my submitted statement, Mr. Chairman, contains additional detail on how we're moving out to achieve these 3 strategic goals, but I'd like to highlight a particular focus on deterrence, especially since I know this is key in the minds of most of the members here. I want to acknowledge upfront that the Secretary and I recognize that we are not where we need to be in our deterrent posture. We do believe that there are some things the Department is doing that are working, but we need to improve in this area without question. And that's why we've revised our cyber strategy. Deterrence is a function of perception. It works by convincing any potential adversary that the costs of conducting the attack far outweigh any potential benefits, and therefore our three main pillars of our cyber deterrence strategy in terms of deterrence are denial, resilience, and cost imposition. Denial means preventing the cyber adversary from achieving his objectives. Resilience is ensuring that our systems will continue to perform their essential military tasks even when they are contested in the cyber environment. And cost imposition is our ability to make our adversaries pay a much higher price for their malicious activities than they hoped for. I'd like to briefly discuss these three elements. To deny the attacker the ability to adversely impact our military missions, we have to better defend our own information networks and data. And we think the investments we have made in these capabilities are starting to bear fruit. But we recognize that technical upgrades are only part of the solution. Nearly every single one of the successful network exploitations that we have had to deal with can be traced to one or more human errors which allowed entry into our network. So raising the level of individual cybersecurity awareness and performance is absolutely paramount. Accordingly, we're working to transform our cybersecurity culture, something that we ignored for a long time, by the long term by improving human performance and accountability in this regard. As part of this effort, we have just recently published a cybersecurity discipline implementation plan and a scorecard that is brought before the Secretary and me every month. And they're critical to achieving this goal of securing our data and our networks and mitigating risks to DoD missions. This scorecard holds commanders accountable for hardening and protecting their endpoints and critical systems, and also have them hold accountable their personnel, and directs, as I said, the compliance reporting to the Secretary and me on a monthly basis. The first scorecard was published in August of this year, and it is being added to and improved as we go. Denial also means defending the nation against cyber threats of significant consequence. The President has directed DoD, working in partnership with our other agencies, to be prepared to blunt and stop the most dangerous cyber events. There may be times where the President and the Secretary of Defense directs DoD and others to conduct a defensive cyber operation to stop a cyber attack from impacting our national interests, and that means building and maintaining the capabilities to do that, just that. This is a challenging mission requiring high-end capabilities and extremely high-trained teams. We're building our cyber mission force and deepening our partnership with law enforcement and the intelligence community to do that. The second principle is improving resiliency by reducing the ability of our adversaries to attack us through cyberspace and protecting our ability to execute missions in a degraded cyber environment. Our adversaries view DoD's cyber dependency as a potential wartime vulnerability. Therefore, we view our ability to fight through cyber attacks as a critical mission function. And that means normalizing cybersecurity as part of our mission assurance efforts, building redundancy whenever our systems are vulnerable, training constantly to operate in a contested cyber environment. Our adversaries have to see that these cyber attacks will not provide them a significant operational advantage. And the third aspect of deterrence is having to demonstrate a capability to respond through cyber or non-cyber means to impose costs on a potential adversary. The administration has made clear that we will respond to cyber attacks in a time, manner, and place of our choosing, and the Department has developed cyber options to hold aggressor at risk in cyberspace if required. Successfully executing our missions requires a whole-of-government and whole-of-nation approach, and for that reason, DoD continues to work with our partners in the other federal departments and agencies and the private sector and our partners around the world to address the shared challenges we face. Secretary Carter has placed particular emphasis on partnering with the private sector. The Department doesn't have all of the answers and is working with industry. We think it will be very, very critical. Finally, our relationship with Congress is absolutely critical. The Secretary and I very much appreciate the support provided to DoD cyber activities throughout from the very beginning, and we understand and we are looking forward to the National Defense Authorization Act to see if there are other improvements that we can do. I encourage continued efforts to pass legislation on cyber security information sharing. We think that is absolutely critical. Data breach notification and law enforcement provisions related to cybersecurity, which were included in the President's legislative proposal submitted earlier this year. I know you agree that the American people expects us to defend the country against cyber threats of significant consequence. The Secretary and I look forward to working with this committee and Congress to ensure we take every step possible to confront the substantial risks we face in the cyber realm. Thank you again for inviting us here today and giving the attention that you have always given to this urgent matter. I'd like to pass it on now to Admiral Rogers, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Sir. Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, and distinguished members of the committee, I am honored to appear before you today to discuss U.S. cyber policy and the state of cyber threats worldwide. I'd like to thank you for convening this forum and for your efforts in this important area. I'm also honored to be sitting alongside Director Clapper and Deputy Secretary of Defense Work. It gives me great pride to appear before you today to highlight and commend the accomplishments of the uniformed and civilian personnel of U.S. Cyber Command. I'm both grateful for and humbled by the opportunity I've been given to lead our cyber team in the important work they do in the defense of our nation and our department. We are being challenged as never before to defend our nation's interests and values in cyberspace against states, groups, and individuals that are using sophisticated capabilities to conduct cyber coercion, cyber aggression, and cyber exploitation. The targets of their efforts extend well beyond government and into privately owned businesses and personally identifiable information. Our military is in constant contact with agile, learning adversaries in cyberspace, adversaries that have shown the capacity and the willingness to take action against soft targets in the United States. There are countries that are integrating cyber operations into a total strategic concept for advancing their regional ambitions. They use cyber operations both to influence the perceptions and actions of states around them and to shape what we see as our options for supporting allies and friends in a crisis. We need to deter these activities by showing that they are unacceptable, unprofitable, and risky for the instigators. U.S. Cyber Command is building capabilities that can contribute to cross-domain deterrence and thus make our commitments even more credible. We are hardening our networks and showing an opponent cyber aggression won't be easy. We are creating the mission force, trained and ready like any other maneuver element, that is defending DoD networks, supporting Joint Force commanders, and helping to defend critical infrastructure within our nation. We are partnering with federal, foreign, and industry partners and exercising together regularly to rehearse concepts and responses to destructive cyber attacks against critical infrastructures. We are generating options for commanders and policymakers across all phases of the conflict, and particularly in Phase 0, to hold at risk what our adversaries truly value. The demand for our cyber forces far outstrips supply, but we continue to rapidly mature based on real-world experiences and the hard work of the men and women of U.S. Cyber Command and our service cyber components, as well as our broader partners. I'd like to assure the committee that U.S. Cyber Command has made measurable progress. We are achieving significant operational outcomes, and we have a clear path ahead. With that, thank you again, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for convening this forum, inviting all of us to speak. Our progress has been made possible in no small part because of the support from this committee and other stakeholders. Unity of effort within our department and across the U.S. government in this mission set is essential, and I appreciate our continued partnership as we build our nation's cyber defenses. And I welcome your questions.
Well, thank you, Admiral, and thank the witnesses. Director Clapper, recently, former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Dempsey was asked about various threats to the United States security, and he said that in a whole range of threats we have a significant advantage, except in cyber. Do you agree with that assessment?
It's probably true. We haven't, I guess, exhibited what our potential capability there is. So I think that's one of the implicit reasons why I have highlighted cyber threats in the last 3 years in my worldwide threat assessments.
I thank you, and you have done that, I think, at least great effect before this committee. As a result of the Chinese leader in Washington, there was some agreement announced between the United States and China. Do you believe that that will result in a elimination of Chinese cyber attacks?
Well, hope springs eternal. I think we will have to watch what their behavior is, and it will be incumbent on the intelligence community, I think, to depict, portray to our policymakers what behavioral changes, if any, result from this agreement.
Are you optimistic?
No.
Thank you. Admiral Rogers, you recently stated, quote, there's a perception there is, quote, little price to pay for engaging in some pretty aggressive behaviors, and because of a lack of repercussions, you see actors, nation states, indeed willing to do more. And that was what you said. What is required? What action is required to deter these attacks, since there's little price to pay? What do we have to do to make it a heavy price to pay?
So I think we have to clearly articulate in broad terms what is acceptable and unacceptable, norms, if you will, of behavior. I think we have to clearly articulate that as a nation, we are developing a set of capabilities. We are prepared to use those capabilities if there's required. They're not necessarily our preference. We clearly want to engage in a dialogue with those around us. But on the other hand, we do have to acknowledge the current situation we find ourselves in. I don't think there's anyone who would agree that it is acceptable and that it is in our best long-term interest as a nation.
Well, I say with respect, I understand it's not acceptable, but in other words, what would enact a price? Would it be relations in other areas? Would it be counterattacks? In other words, what actions would be in our range of arsenals to respond?
So I think it's potentially all of those things. The first comment I would make, I think Sony is a very instructive example. One of the things I always remind people of, we need to think about deterrence much more broadly, not just focus within the cyber arena. I thought the response to Sony, where we, for example, talked about the economic options as a nation we would exercise, was a good way to remind the world around us that there's a broad set of capabilities and levers that are available to us as a nation, and that we're prepared to do more than just respond in kind, if you will.
Director Clapper, one of the things that's been disappointing to the committee is that in the fiscal year defense authorization bill, as you know, it required the president to develop an integrated policy. The strategy is now a year late. Can you tell us where we are in that process and what you feel is what might bring the administration in compliance?
You're asking me about policy development?
Yes.
I think I would defer to Secretary Work on that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, as we have said over and over, we believe our cyber deterrence strategy is constantly evolving and getting stronger.
I'm talking about a policy, not a strategy, Mr. Secretary. It required a policy, the fiscal year 14 National Defense Authorization Act.
The policy is still in development. We believe we have a good cyber strategy. The policy has been outlined in broad strokes by the
Not
President.
broad enough, I would think. Does it describe whether we deter or whether we respond or whether we, in other words, as far as I know, and the committee knows, that there has been no specific policy articulated in compliance with the requirement in the Defense Authorization Act. If you believe that it has, I would be very interested in hearing how it has.
I believe the broad strokes are we will
I'm not asking the
respond
broad
to
strokes. Suppose there's an attack, a cyber attack like the one on OPM. Do we have a policy as to what we do?
Yes, we do.
And what is that?
The first is to try. First, we deny, and then we first find out. We do the forensics.
I'm not asking the methodology. I'm asking the policy. Do you respond by counterattacking? Do you respond by trying to enact other measures? What do we do in case of a cyber attack?
We respond in a time, manner, and place.
Does that
of our
mean
choosing.
that we counterattack?
that may be one of the options.
That's
This is-
not a policy, Secretary Work. That is exercise in options. We have not got a policy in. For you to sit there and tell me that you do, a broad stroke strategy, frankly, is not in compliance with the law. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Director Clapper, we are constantly engaged in, for euphemistically, information operations with many other nations, and they're involved with information operations, trying to, as you indicated in your testimony, influence the opinion, disguise activities, disrupt, et cetera. What agencies are under your purview or outside your purview are actively engaged in information operations for the United States in the cyber world?
Actually, sir, from an intelligence perspective, we would feed that in that we don't, at least in what I can speak to publicly, engage in that as a part of our normal intelligence activity. So we feed other arms, support other arms of the government, not only the State Department, and those responsible for messaging. Right. The National Counterterrorism Center has an office that is devoted to, in a countering violent extremism context, helping to develop themes or recommending themes based on what we glean from intelligence as for potential vulnerabilities and messages that would appear to various groups to obfuscate the message, disrupt it, or compete with it. But generally speaking, intelligence writ large doesn't actively engage in information operations.
From your perspective, are these other agencies that you provide information to adequately resourced and staffed so they can use it effectively, or are they getting a lot of good insights and sitting around wondering what they can do?
If I were king, which I'm not, I think I would have a much more robust capability from the standpoint of the resource commitment to counter messaging.
And that would fall outside the purview of intelligence, more to State Department and to other agencies.
Correct.
And I think we're old enough to remember the Voice of America when it was a pretty dominant sort of source of information.
Well, personal opinion only, not company policy. I would, I think perhaps, a USIA on steroids that would address these messages more broadly and more robustly, but that's strictly personal opinion.
But I think in terms of what you're observing, particularly some of our competitors have an extraordinarily robust information operations. They don't lack for resources or personnel, and they're constantly engaged in these types of information operations, enhancing their image, discrediting their opponents, actively engaging local groups in other countries of interest, et cetera, and we're sort of on the sidelines and more.
I think that's quite right, and in contrast to us, the Russian intelligence services are very active and very aggressively engaged in messaging.
Thank you. Admiral Rogers, so this issue of encryption that Director Comey pointed to, I think your thoughts would be very helpful.
So the issue that we find ourselves, this is less for me on the U.S. Cyber Command side and much more on the NSA side, is communications in the world around us increasingly going to end-to-end encryption, where every aspect of the path is encrypted and the data and the communication is protected at a level that, with the current state of technology, is difficult to overcome. Mm-hmm. Clearly, that's in the best interest of the nation in broad terms, and strong encryption is important to a strong internet defense, and a well-defended internet is in our best interest as a nation and the world's best interest. Within that broad framework, though, the challenge we're trying to figure out is realizing that that communication path is used by very law-abiding citizens, nation states, and companies engaged in lawful activity, is also being used by criminals, terrorists, nation states who would attempt to generate advantage against the United States and against our allies and partners. And so we're trying to figure out how do we balance these two important imperatives of privacy and security and realizing that the technical world around us is changing in a foundational way. And so we're trying to come to grips broadly with how do we deal with the reality of the technical world around us and yet the broader legal and social imperatives we have. I'm the first to acknowledge we do not have a defined way ahead here. In the end, I think this is about how do we get the best minds together as a nation to address this? Because when I look at our capabilities as a nation, there is no problem we can't overcome when we work together in an integrated way between the private sector, industry, business, the academic world. I think that's the way ahead here in broad terms.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Inhofe is chairing the EPW committee. That's why he couldn't be here today. You've given us a good summary of the threats that we face and the threats that are actually occurring today, and I appreciate that. Senator McCain asked you about reporting on the policy that Congress has asked you to report on, and that not having been done. Mr. Secretary of Work, in the 2014 NDAA, the Senate and House agreed on a provision that required the services to report on the cyber vulnerabilities of weapons and communication systems connected by networks. That's something that came out of our strategic subcommittee on a bipartisan basis and was eventually expanded to include all weapons systems, not just satellites and missiles and national missile defense. We don't have that final report. I believe it's overdue. This budget, I believe, has $200 million in it to help fund this effort. What can you tell us about that? First, let me say it may take some time. If it does, I understand. But I don't think we've had any report from the DOD to state that what progress you've made and how much longer it will take.
Well, again, on both of the points, on the policy, we expect that is in the final deliberations. It's an interagency effort. Generally trying to establish norms, and deterrence is central to the policy. Again, it's the denial, resilience, and cost imposition. I'm the first to admit that we are the farthest ahead on the denial and the resilience part. Those are the areas where we are moving faster. The cost imposition part, because we have elected to retain the retaliatory mechanism of cyber attacks at the national level, just like nuclear weapons, because of the risk of escalation.
What about the
interagency? As far as the, oh, I'm sorry, sir.
Yes, sir.
As far as
vulnerabilities of our weapon systems?
It is a big, big problem. Many of the weapon systems that we have now were not built to withstand a concerted cyber threat. So going through every single one of the weapon systems, what Frank Kendall has done is he's prioritized the weapon systems, and he is working through very carefully, and I expect this work to be done very soon. We now have new requirements in our KPPs, our key performance parameters for new
So you have
weapon systems.
assigned an individual
Absolutely,
to
sir.
be responsible for this?
Yes, Frank Kendall is the one who is going through all of the different, working with, obviously, our CIO, also the Cyber Command, and all of our cyber experts. But he's responsible for taking a look at the weapon systems and also requiring KPPs, key performance parameters, for new weapon systems, so that when we build them, they will have cyber defenses built in from the beginning.
What about our defense contractors? Admiral Rogers, they maintain and build these systems and have highly sensitive information. Are we satisfied they're sufficiently protected?
So we certainly acknowledge there's a vulnerability there. We've been very public about our concerns about foreign nation states trying to access some of our key operational technology through penetrations in the cleared defense contract arena for us. We've made changes to the contractual relationships between us and those companies where they have to meet minimum cybersecurity requirements. They have to inform us now of penetrations. We're clearly not where we need to be, but we continue to make progress.
Well, I think it's a bipartisan commitment on Congress to help you with that, Secretary of Work. If it takes more money, let us know. We'll have to evaluate it. And I also understand that some of the protections can be done without much cost. Some may require considerable cost. So we hope that you will complete that. Admiral Rogers, you, I believe last week, reported in the Los Angeles Times about the threat from China. You note one thing, that they are involved in obtaining U.S. commercial and trade data. And a foreign nation, an advanced nation, ally of ours, I was told that one of their companies bid on a contract and that the Chinese had got all the bid data from the web. And his comment was, it's hard to win a bid when your competitor knows what you're bidding. Is that kind of thing happening?
It has been. We've been very public of that. I think that's reflected in the agreement that you saw raised during the President of China's visit last week, where we were very explicit about that concern.
Well, my time is up, but I would just ask, you're not allowed, if you saw an American business being damaged through improper action, you're not allowed to advise them or share any information with them while our adversaries do assist their businesses? Is that basically
The way this
correct?
works right now is I would provide information and insight both in my intelligence hat as the director of NSA as well as the commander of U.S. Cyber Command. If under that authority I became aware of activity, I would share the insights with DHS and the FBI, who have a mission associated with interfacing with the private sector in a much more direct way than I do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all three of you for your service and for being here today. Admiral Rogers, if I start with you, which country is the most committed, determined, and successful hacker of the U.S.?
Could you say that one more time, Senator?
Which country do you believe is the most committed, successful hacker of the U.S.?
If you look at volume and nation statewide, I would, China, the PRC, has been the one that we've been the most vocal about. They're not the only one by any stretch of the imagination.
I thought the last time you were here, you said that, I recall you saying that you had more concerns over Russia having more of the ability or expertise to do us damage.
I thought your question was really focused more on volume. If the perspective is capability, if you will, then we have been very public about saying I would probably put the Russians in higher capability.
But it seems like that China is more committed and determined to do it.
They certainly do it at a volume level.
Gotcha. I understand. And Director Clapper, if I may, I know that you just said no, emphatically no, you don't believe that this agreement that the President of China and our President has made last week will work. With that saying, what are is there any penalties in this agreement if one or the other violates it? Or is it just basically, well, we have agreed and let it go at that?
The terms of
As you understand it.
The terms of it I have seen, I don't think it treats specifically penalties. There certainly are implied penalties. I think the threat of economic sanctions that which brought Minister Meng to this country, I think is illustrative of what would mean something to the Chinese if they transgress or violate this agreement. And I think, as Admiral Rogers was discussing earlier, with respect to sanctions, there certainly are whole of government possibilities here. You don't have to do necessarily a cyber eye for an eye. It can be some other form of retaliation. But I don't think, to answer your question, at least what I'm aware of, that there are specific penalties if the agreement is violated.
And that's why I think you were pretty quick in saying you don't think it'll work. You said no to that, I think, when the chairman asked you.
Well, the reason I said no, of course, is the extent to which Chinese purloining of our data, our intellectual property, is pretty pervasive. I think there's a question about the extent to which the government actually orchestrates all of it or not. So I think we're in to borrow President Reagan term, trust but verify mode, at least as far as intelligence is concerned, and we are inherently skeptics.
Sir, could I add something?
If I could, I have a question for you, Secretary, and then you can go ahead and add to that. There's a the recent news article that examines similarities between China's J-31 fighter and our F-35 strike fighter, and what they've been able to do in such a rapid period of time without any R&D. Do you believe that that gives them a competitive advantage? I mean, I understand there might be some differences as far as in the software and the weaponry and this and that. But they're making leaps which are uncommon at the behest of us. And we know this, I understand, but we're not taking any actions against them.
Well, I'd like to work this in to your,
Yes,
and follow up with
You
your
go ahead.
first question. At the highest levels, we have made it clear that we believe that Chinese actions in the cybersphere are totally unacceptable as a nation state. And we made that clear in a wide variety of different ways. And I would characterize the agreement that we have as a confidence-building measure with the Chinese, where we are asking them to prove to us that they are serious about what they say, about what they will do to control these efforts. So there were really 4 things that we agreed to do. First, we would give timely responses to information when we say, hey, we believe that there is a problem here, and we have agreed to exchange information on cyber crimes. We've agreed to possibly collect electronic evidence and to mitigate malicious cyber activity that's occurring on our soil. We both agreed that we would not knowingly conduct cyber-enabled theft of intellectual property, which, as you say, Senator, has been a problem. We have told them it's a problem, it's unacceptable. They have said that they will work to curb that. Then we've agreed to have common effort to promote international norms. And the final thing is we'll have a high-level joint mechanism where we can meet at least twice a year and say, look, this is just not working. You are not coming through with what you've said. So this isn't a treaty or anything like that. It's a confidence-building measure for us to find out if China is going to act responsibly. I agree totally with Director Clapper. They've got to prove to us. And we know that they have stolen information from our defense contractors.
Right.
And it has helped them develop systems. And we have hardened our systems through the Defense Industrial Base Initiative, and we're trying to make
But I'm saying, we know that J-20 is pretty much mirroring our F-22. We know that their J-31 is pretty much mirroring our F-35. When we know this and the cost to the American taxpayers and let them get I mean, why wouldn't we take hard actions against them? Or why wouldn't we come down? I just don't understand why we wouldn't retaliate from a financial standpoint.
There are a wide variety of cost imposition options that we have. They're developed through the interagency. And again, it's not necessarily tit for tat. It is proportional response, and we're working through all of those right now.
My time is up, sir, and if I could just follow up on that later, if we can meet with you later, I'd
Absolutely,
very much appreciate it.
Senator, if I may, just to add a word here about, this is a point Admiral Rogers has made in the past about, terminology, lexicon, nomenclature, definitions are important. And so what this represents, of course, is espionage, cyber espionage. And, of course, we, too, practice cyber espionage in a public forum to say how successful we are, but we're not bad at it. So when we talk about what are we going to do to counter espionage or punish somebody or retaliate for espionage, well, I think it's a good idea to at least think about the old saw about people who live in glass houses.
Gotcha.
Shouldn't throw rocks.
So it's okay for them to steal our secrets that are most important, including
didn't say
a
that,
fighter.
I didn't say that, Senator.
Because we live in a glass house. That is astounding. Senator Ayotte.
I did not say it's a good thing. I'm just saying that both nations engage in this.
I want to thank all of you for being here. With regard to the Chinese, I want to follow up on, we've talked about the stealing of the highest secrets in terms of our weapons system, but what about the 21 million people whose background check and personal information has been, of course, associated publicly with the Chinese, and the fact that we know that 5 million sets of fingerprints as well, leading to potential vulnerability for our citizens. And if you put that in the context of these other issues that we've raised, it seems to me, I looked very carefully, for example, Secretary Work, at some of the language you've been using. You gave a speech at the Royal United Services Institute in London. You said deterrence must be demonstrated to be effective. Secretary Clapper, in your prepared statement, you said the muted response by most victims to cyber attacks has created a permissive environment. So I'm trying to figure out, based on what you've said, how we're not in a permissive environment in light of what they've stolen on our weapon systems, but also this huge infringement on 21 million people in this country. And also, could you comment on the vulnerability of that data and where we are in terms of how it can be used against us?
First, that is an assessment of what was taken. We actually don't know in terms of specifics, but that's, I think, frames the magnitude of this theft. And it is potentially very serious, has very serious implications. First, close to home from the standpoint of the intelligence community and the potential for identifying people who may be under covered status, just one small example. And of course, it poses all kinds of potential, and unfortunately, this is a gift that's going to keep on giving for years. So it's a very serious situation. What we've tried to do is educate people what to look for and how to protect themselves. But again, this is a huge theft, and it has potentially damaging implications for lots of people in the intelligence community and lots of people in the Department of Defense and other employees
So
of
I
the government.
think what you're hearing from some of us up here is just now, what are we going to do about it is the issue, as opposed to a shared agreement on generic principles with the Chinese. This is a pretty significant issue that is going to impact millions of Americans. I'm not hearing what we're going to do about it, but that may be a higher level decision going up to the president. But it seems to me if we're going to talk about deterrence, if we don't follow up with action, and if you look at that combined with the testimony we heard last week about the artificial islands being built by the Chinese, and the fact that we won't even go within, I believe it's 12 nautical miles of those islands, if you put that all from the Chinese perspective, I think you think, we can pretty much do what we want to do because we haven't seen a response. Now, I'm not asking from all of you to answer that, because it probably needs to be answered by the president and his national security team. But it seems to me that they aren't seeing a response right now from us, and therefore we're going to continue to see bad behavior from the Chinese. Before I go, I have an important question on another topic, Secretary Work, and that is yesterday we heard public reports about a potential violation of the INF Treaty by the Russians, and that essentially Russia flight tested a new ground-launched cruise missile this month that U.S. intelligence agencies say further violates the 1987 INF Treaty. And of course, this is going back also to the reports as early as 2008 of the Russia conducting tests of another ground-launched cruise missile in potential violation of the INF Treaty that we've raised with them. And when Secretary Carter came before our committee on his confirmation, he listed 3 potential responses to these INF violations. So now we have the Russians violating the INF Treaty yet again. And I guess my question is, Secretary Carter rightly identified that we should respond either through missile defense, counterforce, or countervailing measures. What are we doing about it?
Senator, this is a longstanding issue that we have been discussing with the Russians. The system that you're talking about is in development. It has not been fielded yet. We have had different discussions with them on our perception of the violation of the INF, and they have come back. This is still in discussions, and we have not decided on any particular action at this point.
So are you saying that you don't think they violated the INF Treaty?
We believe very strongly that they did.
That's what I thought. So what are we going to do about it? Because they're claiming that they haven't, going back to the 2008 violations, and now here we have another situation.
It's still under, because they have not fielded the system, we are still in the midst of negotiating this position. We are giving ours, but if they do field a system that violates the INF, I would expect us to take one of the three options that Secretary Carter outlined before the committee.
So my time is up, but I see two consistent themes here, both with the Chinese and the Russian. A lot of talk, no action, unfortunately, and people take their cues from that, and that worries me. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Clapper, you testified before the House Intelligence Committee recently that while the United States makes distinctions between cyber attacks conducted for economic purposes or to gain foreign intelligence, that's the espionage arena, I think, that you're referring to, or to cause damage, our adversaries do not. Would you consider the OPM breach, to the extent that we believe it is a state actor who did that, that would be in the category of espionage?
Yes.
So-
That was the tenor of the discussion at the HPSI hearing Admiral Rogers and I engaged in. And of course, that has to do with the, as I mentioned earlier, Senator Manchin, the importance of definition, nomenclature, and terms. So, and the definition of these terms. And so what the theft of the OPM data, as egregious as it was, we wouldn't necessarily consider it as an attack. Rather, it would be a form of theft or espionage.
And as you say, other countries, including our own, engages in such activities. My understanding of the recent agreement between the United States and China, though, has to do with commercial cyber theft. And I think that's a very different category that has to do with obtaining information about corporations, et cetera, and therefore that is in the category of economic attacks. So, Director Clapper, would you consider that kind of an agreement to be helpful? I realize that you are skeptical, but to the extent that we're defining a particular kind of cyber attack, and that we're contemplating through this agreement an ability of our two countries to engage in high-level dialogue regarding these kinds of attacks. Is that a helpful situation?
Well, it'd be very helpful if, of course, the Chinese actually live up to what they agreed to. So if and what the agreement pertained to was theft of data for economic purposes, to give Chinese commercial concerns an advantage, or their defense industries an advantage. As opposed to, I don't believe that we've agreed with the Chinese to stop spying on each other.
Yes.
And so there is a for purely espionage purposes, and there is a distinction.
Mr. Secretary, you can weigh in on this also. To the extent that we've created a potential for dialogue or an environment where there's a process to be followed in the cases where we suspect commercial cyber attacks, that at least we have a way that we can talk to the Chinese. Because you also mentioned, Director Clapper, that attribution is not the easiest thing, although we are getting better at figuring out who actually were the actors that did these cyber attacks. So one hopes that even with a great deal of skepticism going forward, that this agreement may create the space for us to have more than a conversation, but one that would lead to some kind of a change in behavior on the part of these state actors. Mr. Secretary, feel free to give us your opinion.
Senator, I think that's exactly right. I mean, as Director Clapper said, first you have to find out the geographical location from where the attack came from. Then you have to identify the actor. And then you have to identify whether the government of that geographic space was either controlling.
Recognize that's not the easiest to do, yes.
And what we have done is we have confronted China, and China in some cases has said, look, this was a hacker that was inside our country, but we had no control of him. What this allows us to do is say, okay, well, what are you going to do about that? That's a cyber crime. Are you going to provide us the information we need to prosecute this person? Are you going to take care of it on your own? So I believe this type of confidence-building measure and this way to discuss these things the proof will be in the pudding, how the Chinese react to this.
Mr. Secretary, I think you mentioned that this particular agreement allows, contemplates meeting at least twice a year. Is there
Yes.
anything that prevents more frequent dialogue between our two countries in suspected cases of commercial cyber attacks?
Senator, I believe if there was a significant cyber event that we suspected the Chinese of doing, or they suspected us, that we would be able to meet this. This is going to be a high-level joint dialogue. The Chinese will have it at the ministerial level. Our U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security and the U.S. Attorney General will co-lead on our part. We're going to have the first meeting of this group by the end of this calendar year, and then at least twice a year. So I believe that, as Director Clapper is, I think all of us have some healthy skepticism about this, but I believe it's a good confidence-building measure and a good first step, and we will see if it leads to better behavior on the part of the Chinese.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, I can't help but comment. We have identified the PLA, the building in which they operate. Now, please don't deceive this committee as if we don't know who's responsible for it. That's just very disingenuous. There have been public reports that we've identified the PLA building in which these cyber attacks come from. Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. Admiral Rogers, I'll start with you, sir. Two of the president's 9 lines of effort in defeating ISIL are, first, exposing ISIS's true nature, and second, disrupting the foreign fighter flow. And over the weekend, the New York Times reported that 30,000 recruits joined ISIS over the past year, and that's double the previous recruitment year. Earlier this month, in reference to ISIS recruiting, the State Department's ambassador at large and coordinator for counterterrorism said that ISIS's recruiting trend is still upward, and this information came of no surprise to her. The ambassador also said the upward trend was primarily due to internet and social media. So, sir, do you believe the administration's efforts have so far succeeded on these 2 lines of effort in cyberspace and social media? Just please, simple yes or no.
No.
Okay, in light of that, with the record recruiting numbers for ISIS, how would you then assess the effectiveness of the U.S. government's counter-ISIS effort in cyberspace? So what specifically is your assessment of the State Department's Think Again, Turn Away program in support of efforts to disrupt ISIS's online recruiting effort?
Senator, I'm not in a position to comment on State Department, the specifics of their program. I honestly am just not knowledgeable about it. I will say this broadly to get to, I think, your broader point. I have always believed that we must contest ISIL in the information domain every bit as aggressively as we are contesting them on the battlefield. That the information dynamic is an essential component of their vision, their strategy, and ultimately their success. And we have got to be willing to attempt to fight them in that domain just like we are in the battlefield. And we clearly are not there yet.
I agree. I think we are failing in this effort, and some of the programs that we have seen obviously are not working. So are there areas in where you could recommend how the U.S. government better partner with various NGOs or private entities to more effectively counter the ISIS propaganda?
Again, the contesting the propaganda piece, much broader than Cyber Command's mission. I will say from a technical and operational perspective, we broadly within the DoD, with Cyber Command, Strategic Command, and CENTCOM are looking at within our authorities, within our capabilities, what's within the realm of the possible in terms of what can we do to help contest them in this domain.
Okay. We have a larger problem coming forward, too, in regards to ISIS and ISIL in the Middle East. We seem to see the emergence of a trifecta between Syria, Iran, and Russia. And now it seems that Iraq has begun information sharing with Russia, with Iran, with Syria. Director Clapper, can you speak to that and the broader implications of Russia emerging as a leader in the Middle East while we seem to be frittering away our opportunity with ISIL?
Well, that's certainly their objective. I think they have several objectives here, one of which is that, I think, protect their base, their presence in Syria, ergo their buildup in the northwest part of Syria. Clearly want to prop up Assad, and I think a belated motivation for them is fighting ISIL. As far as the joint intelligence arrangement is concerned, I can't go into detail here in this forum, but I will say there are, each of the parties entering into this are a little bit suspicious of just what is entailed here. So we'll have to see just how robust a capability that actually provides.
Okay, I appreciate that. And Secretary Work, do you have any thoughts on the emergence of Russia with the intelligence sharing, how that might impact the operations that we have ongoing in Iraq against ISIS?
Well, I think we were caught by surprise that Iraq entered into this agreement with Syria and Iran and Russia. Obviously, we are not going to share intelligence with either Syria or Russia or Iran. So we are in the process. We're in the process of working to try to find out exactly what Iraq has said. Certainly, we're not going to provide any classified information or information that would help those actors on the battlefield. Really, what we're trying to do is deconflict, and that is the primary purpose of the discussion between President Obama and President Putin yesterday. Is if you are going to act on this battlefield, we have to deconflict. The other thing we have made clear is they would like to do a military first, followed by a political transition. We believe those two things have to go in parallel, and that has been our consistent message. This is early days. We're still in the midst of discussing what exactly this means. So I don't have any definitive answers for you at this point, Senator.
Well, I am very concerned that we have abdicated our role in the Middle East and in so many other areas, as has been pointed out earlier. Grave concern to all of us, and I think we need to be working much more diligently on this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for your public service. Admiral, I'm concerned about all of these private telecoms that are going to encrypt. If you have encryption of everything, how, in your opinion, does that affect Section 702 and 215 collection programs?
It certainly makes it more difficult.
Does the administration have a policy position on this?
No, I think we're still, we're the first to acknowledge this is an incredibly complicated issue with a lot of very valid perspectives. And we're still, I think, collectively trying to work our way through, so what's the right way ahead here? Recognizing that there's a lot of very valid perspectives. But from the perspective as Cyber Command and NSA that I look at the issue, there's a huge challenge for us here that we have got to deal with.
A huge challenge. And I have a policy position, and that is that the telecoms better cooperate with the United States government, or else it just magnifies the ability for the bad guys to utilize the internet to achieve their purposes. Speaking of that, we have a fantastic U.S. military. We are able to protect ourselves. It's the best military in the world, but we have a vulnerability now, and it's a cyber attack. You want to see if you can make me feel any better about our ability to protect ourselves going forward?
So I would tell you the current state of capability in the department, if I just look at where we were 18 months ago, 2 years ago, is significantly improved. We currently defeat probably 99 point some odd % attempts to penetrate DoD systems on a daily basis. The capability in terms of both the amount of teams, their capability just continues to improve, our speed, our agility. The challenge for us fundamentally to me is we are trying to overcome decades of a thought process in which redundancy, defensibility, and reliability were never core design characteristics for our networks, where we assumed in the development of our weapons systems that external interfaces, if you will, with the outside world were not something to be overly concerned with. They represented opportunity for us to remotely monitor activity, to generate data as to how aircraft, for example, or ships' hulls were doing in different sea states around the world. All positives if you're trying to develop the next generation, for example, of cruiser destroyer for the Navy. But in a world in which those public interfaces, if you were, increasingly represent also potential points of vulnerability, you get this class of strategies, if you will, and that's where we find ourselves now. So one of the things I try to remind people is it took us decades to get here. We are not going to fix this set of problems in a few years. This takes dedicated prioritization, dedicated commitment, resources, and we got to do this in a smart way. We got to prioritize and we got to figure out what's the greatest vulnerability and where's the greatest concern for us.
Senator, is it okay if I jump in here for a second?
Yes, I just want to add to that, and for us to let our potential enemies understand that we have the capability of doing to them what they do to us. However, that gets more complicated when you're dealing with a rogue group of a dozen people stuck in a room somewhere that are not part of a nation state. Yes, sir, Mr. Secretary.
Well, I was just going to echo what Admiral Rogers said. When Secretary Carter came in, he said, look, we are absolutely not where we need to be, and he made job number one defense of the networks. So we're going from 15,000 enclaves to less than 500. We're going from 1,000 defendable firewalls to less than 200, somewhere between 50 and 200. So you are absolutely right. We have recognized this as a terrible vulnerability. We are working first to defend our networks, as we talked about earlier. We're looking at our systems, and we're also trying to change the culture. Right now, if you discharge a weapon, you are held accountable for that. That's a negligent discharge is one of the worst things you can do. What we need to do is inculcate a culture where a cyber discharge is considered just as bad, and make sure that that culture is inculcated throughout the force.
I agree, but now the Admiral is assaulted by the telecoms who want to tie his hands behind his back by doing all of the encryption. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In our state, Naval Surface Warfare Center, Crane, has taken the lead on much of our efforts to protect against the threat of counterfeit electronics. And so Secretary Work and Director Clapper, the global supply chain for microelectronics presents a growing challenge for cybersecurity. One of the things we saw recently, IBM sold its chip-making facilities with DoD trusted foundry status to a foreign-owned competitor. So I was wondering your top priorities in managing the risk posed by the globalization of our microelectronics manufacturing capabilities and our abilities to protect our systems in that area.
It's a big question, Senator. In fact, it's going to be one of the key things we look at in this fall review because of the recent, as you said, the recent sale of the IBM chips. Now, there are two schools of thought on this. Secretary Carter personally has jumped into this, and some say you do not need a trusted foundry. Another group says you absolutely have to have it. Having confidence in the chips that we put in our weapon systems is important, and I would expect that come February we'll be able to report out the final decisions through the fall review on how we're going to tackle this problem.
Who within DoD's leadership has primary responsibility for overseeing the supply chain risk management?
That would be Frank Kindle and also DLA. DLA has the supply chain, and Frank Kindle is really focused on the trusted chip, the fabrication of trusted chips.
One of the areas that we look at in regards to cyber, and in some ways, technology in particular parts of it not advancing has been a good thing in this respect, is in the nuclear area. And so are there any specific groups that are focused just on protecting our nuclear efforts against cyber?
There's the national, the NNSA, and also we have a Nuclear Weapons Council, which is co-chaired by, again, Frank Kindle, our Undersecretary of Defense for AT&L, and the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. They are the ones that work with DOE to make sure that our weapon system components are reliable and trusted, and to make sure that we have a safe, reliable, and effective nuclear deterrent.
Admiral, when we look at building a force of cyber warriors, a cyber team, how can we use the National Guard and Reserves to help do that? Because it strikes me that that can help us in retaining highly qualified individuals who want to devote part of their life to helping their country. And it would seem to almost be a perfect fit for us.
So we have taken a total force approach to the force that we're building out that includes both Guard and Reserve. Every service slightly different, not the least of which because different services have different Reserve and Guard structures. So that is a part of it. I'd say one of the challenges that we're still trying to work our way through is under the Title 32 piece, how we coordinate what Guard and Reserve are doing, how we generate capacity and bring it to bear with maximum efficiency. The two things in partnering with my Guard teammates and my Reserve teammates, because we're taking a total force approach to this, we need one standard for this. We don't want a place where the Guard and Reserve are trained to one standard and the active side is trained to a different. That gives us maximum flexibility in how we apply the capability across the force, and the Guard and Reserve has done great in that regard. And then secondly, we need one common unit structure. We don't want to build unique one-of-a-kind structures in the Guard or Reserves that don't match the Title 10 side. Again, we want to treat this as one integrated force. And again, I would give the Guard and the Reserve great kudos in that regard. We've got a common vision about the way we need to go, and we've got a great exercise series, Cyber Guard, that we're using every year where we bring together the Guard, the private sector, the active component, government, and work our way through the specifics of, well, how are we going to make this work?
Director Clapper, and I apologize if you already answered this. What is the one cyber challenge you are most concerned about?
Well, obviously, the one I have to think about would be a massive Armageddon-like scale attack against our infrastructure. That is not, we don't consider that the most likely probability right now, that the greater threat are the low to moderate sort of threats that we're seeing. And what I have seen in the 5 years I've been in this job is a sort of progression where these get more aggressive and more damaging. And as I indicated in my oral statement at the outset, what I will see, I think what we could expect next are data manipulation, which then calls to question the integrity of the data, which in many ways is more insidious than the kinds of attacks that we've suffered thus far. So, you know, the specter is this massive attack, although it's not likely.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Annex 3 of the recently signed Iran nuclear agreement calls for the participating countries to work with Iran to, quote, strengthen Iran's ability to protect against and respond to nuclear security threats, including sabotage, as well as to enable effective and sustainable nuclear security and physical protection systems, close quote. Secretary Clapper, do you read this portion of the Iran nuclear agreement the Annex to include cyber threats, meaning that the P5+1 countries who are part of this agreement will be expected, will be deemed to have an obligation under the agreement to assist Iran in developing systems to prevent other countries from using cyber capabilities to acquire information about or to disrupt the operations of Iran's nuclear capabilities, Iran's nuclear programs?
Well, in this environment, I will say that I trust that this is not going to prevent us from gleaning intelligence from our traditional sources in the interest of verifying the agreement, which will be principally monitored by international organization, IAEA. So I'm not aware of any strictures on our ability to collect on their behavior and their compliance.
But why would we want to give Iran the ability to defend against cyber weapons that we or perhaps some of our allies might one day want to use against Iran?
Well, sir, in this open environment, there are some aspects here that I can't discuss. Happy to talk with you privately or in a classified environment about that.
Okay. Okay, but you're not disputing the fact that the agreement says that we would have to agree?
No.
Okay. Now, can you tell me in this environment what specific technical assistance we'll be offering Iran in this portion of the agreement?
I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I have to have that researched. I don't know exactly what's in mind there.
Now, would any of these capabilities, once acquired by Iran, prevent or inhibit the United States or any of our allies, any other enemy of Iran, from using any cyber measure against Iranian nuclear facilities?
Again, I'm reluctant to discuss that in this setting.
Were you consulted by U.S. negotiators during the nuclear negotiations in connection with this portion of the agreement? The agreement?
Well, the intelligence community was deeply involved throughout the negotiations.
Can you describe the nature of any consultation you had with them as to this portion of Annex 3?
With the Iranians?
Yes.
No, I did not engage with the Iranians on that.
No, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if you can describe your discussions with U.S. negotiators as they came to you and consulted with you on the implications of this portion of Annex 3.
I didn't actually. My lead for this was Norm Rule, who is known to many of you on this committee, National Intelligence Manager for Iran, and he was the direct participant. And I don't want to speak for him as to the extent to which he was involved or consulted on that provision. I'd have to ask him.
Okay, but you would have been aware of consultation going on. I'm sure he came to you and said, "Look, this is going to impact our ability, the ability of the United States to do what we need to do with respect to Iran."
Again, sir, I would rather discuss what the potential response of ours could be in a closed setting.
Okay. Secretary Work, how is the department working to ensure that the hardware and software on some of these major programs that we're developing to future contingencies and technological advances so they can continue to address emerging cyber threats well into the future without major overhauls of the entire system?
Senator, as I said, we are now putting into our KPPs, our key performance parameters, on any new systems, specific cyber hardening requirements, much like during the Cold War when we had EMP requirements for many of our systems. The problem that we face is that many of the old systems that are still in service were not built to respond to the cyber threats that we see today. So we're having to go back through all of those older systems, determine which ones are most vulnerable, prioritize them, and make fixes. And also goes back to Senator Donnelly's question on the trusted foundry. We're trying to determine what is the best way to assure that we have reliable and trusted microelectronics.
Okay, thank you. I see my time's expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.